Good morning, everybody, and thanks, Pete, for inviting me here, and Steve, and George Stites, and a couple of other faces I know around the room. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm going to spend the next 10-15 minutes sharing our experience. We're quite a bit behind you folks, but hopefully you're going to enjoy the little package and ask a lot of questions. So what do we know about electric buses? We know there's zero tailpipe emissions, at least in the configuration that we're looking at. They're much quieter inside and outside. They're smoother accelerating, potentially. They're growing rapidly, potentially lowering vehicle costs, but they're not zero impact. And I've heard a lot of good questions in the audience, and I'll try to address them. That's a recent slide that I borrowed from CalSTART with their permission. Again, you'll see the number of pilots is growing. And on the New York City side, we have some challenges. We first had to identify our stakeholders. We have a lot of internal stakeholders, sister agencies. The MTA operates the Department of Subways, which you're familiar with, Department of Buses and MTA Bus, two sister agencies, Bridges and Tunnels. Very, very large organization, very difficult to navigate through. And we need a lot of stakeholder support to successfully scale up electric bus deployments. And that's primarily what I'm working on. We do have some technical partners. Pete mentioned EPRI, Center for Transportation Excellence. I think they changed the name recently. NYSERDA is a New York local. But we also have a very unique relationship with the city agencies. Even though we call New York City Transit, the MTA is a New York State agency. We're a guest in New York City. We do not own any property. We operate by something called revocable consent. When we no longer provide a useful service to the city can ask us to pack up and leave or move the bus stops. The city of New York maintains our bus lanes as well as our bus stops. And the New York City Department of Transportation is a very important partner to us in a lot of our projects. But again, we're a guest in New York City, and that's going to become important a little bit later. We receive our energy from Con Edison. Con Edison is a distributor. We do not pay Con Edison for our electric bill. We purchase power from the New York Power Authority, which is another state agency. New York Power Authority generates power as well as distributes it. Con Edison distributes it within New York City at the local level. So we started with our pilot program. We defined it as a 3-year lease. We're using operating funds to do this. This was the fastest, most expeditious way for us in the context of the complicated stakeholder space to quickly deploy our program. So what are we going to do? We're going to lease 10 buses from two different manufacturers. Very important to understand how important battery sizing is to the life cycle cost of the vehicle, and to understand that various OEMs can ship vehicles with different battery sizes. But what is the right battery size, and how do you determine that? What is the right mix or ratio of depot versus en route charging or opportunity charging? And we'd still like to develop some requirements and standards internally, because the industry is moving very, very slowly in developing charging standards. We currently have 4 different schemes, and they don't seem to be converging as fast as we would like to see them. So for some of you that are familiar with the geography of New York City, this is meant to confuse you. This is more of an internal slide. This is Manhattan, that's Brooklyn. Midtown separates Brooklyn and Queens. What we're looking at is a transit plaza, which we don't have a lot of them in New York City because we don't own a lot of real estate. But this particular one is interesting because it operates 9 routes. One of the routes goes into Manhattan, a couple of the routes go into Queens, and the rest are local to Brooklyn. That's pretty much what the charging mast is going to look like, almost. Why? Because we're still in the final dialogue with the Public Design Commission in terms of design details. You don't install street furniture in the city of New York. You don't install street furniture that the public interfaces with unless you review through a process called the Public Design Commission. The Design Commission is a group of architects, engineers, landscape architects that are looking primarily for aesthetics. New York City Department of Transportation has a design manual that provides guidelines for what things should look like, what type of materials you want to use. Typically stainless steel finishes, glass finishes are favorite materials. And I presented this program to the New York City Department of Transportation in November of last year. When I reviewed the program, their position was, we need to take a break. you guys have 6,000 buses. How many buses can you charge at this station over a period of an hour, let's say? And I said, about 6. So you're going to put 1,000 of these on my street? Where? So we actually asked the two manufacturers to contract with an industrial designer that has successfully deployed street furniture in New York City in order to provide some enclosures that fit the design guidelines that New York City DOT and the New York City Public Design Commission is looking for. So on the lower right, you're going to see one of the enclosures. In this particular case, this is a Proterra project, even though that's not a Proterra bus. We try to add the secondary functionality that New York City is looking for. So we have some benches and some lean-tos, as well as a glass cover that's similar to our bus stop designs. So that was some highlights on the Brooklyn phase. The second phase is going to be in Manhattan. That's the M42 route. It's a pretty short route. It's a little over 2 miles each leg. And we're planning to put 2 opportunity charges at the end of each route and 1 maintenance charger at the depot. So deadhead distances and times are not that important. This is the M42. North of it is the M50. Manhattan crosstown routes are named by the streets that they operate in. So the M50 is on 50th Street. The M42 is on 42nd Street through Times Square. One thing that we want to do with these routes is try to see if we can use these electric buses at what we call our night buses. We have buses that stay in service in excess of 20 hours a day. And one of the pros of electric buses is if you have en route charging, there's no reason to bring them back to the garage. They could stay in service theoretically indefinitely as long as you had some way to clean them, which we currently don't, but we're exploring that. So for those of you folks in service planning, you kind of know that we spend quite a bit of time and money in deadheading buses from a garage to the point of insertion in service and return back to the depot and trying to get the operators and the buses to get together. So, big concern for us in New York City is that on very cold days, the worst case scenario is a single-digit day with low ridership on the route. We think through our calculations and our modeling that we're going to spend significantly more energy from the batteries for heating and ventilation than we're going to spend for propulsion. So that's really our concern is how do we size the battery in order to meet those heating and air conditioning loads during those peak periods for the routes that are going to use most of that energy for heating and ventilation. For propulsion, it's not a big deal. So again, I think that what reinforces this approach is you're going to hear that bus manufacturers are going to come to you and they're going to say, my bus can go 1,100 miles on a battery charge. My bus can go 170 miles on a battery charge. In a compact and dense city like New York, that's not really that important. I have very, very few routes where I need 170 miles of range. But I do have HVAC loads that really can take a significant chunk out of that range. So now I'm on the west side of Manhattan. I'm in front of a Circle Line operation. Circle Line is one of those nice tour bus that goes around Manhattan. And we had to design a custom enclosure for the transformer, rectifier, and switchgear. You're going to see it over here adjacent to the light pole. And again, over here, we had to work with the Hudson River Park Trust, another agency that's tasked with aesthetic as well as economic development of everything west of the West Side Highway below the Intrepid Museum and north of Battery Park City. So as the city tries to expand real estate and reclaim dock space and things that are used, generally they'll work either with the state of New York or with various other entities to create an agency to oversee the economic development, the aesthetic development, to make sure that meets the public needs in that particular area, and it matches the character of the neighborhood. And now we're on the east side of Manhattan, and this is on East 41st Street, and we have a very narrow sidewalk. It's a little bit broken up, so we have to fix that. We're going to install the mast on the sidewalk. That leaves us with a minimal space clearance that's required. New York City requires 5 feet minimum for wheelchair accessibility. And we decided that the transformer, rectifier, switchgear enclosure is going to go into the yard of our sister agency, Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority. And the structure in the background, it's actually the ventilation tower for the Queens Midtown Tunnel. So there's a vehicular tunnel that allows cars, buses, trucks to move from Queens to Manhattan. It has 2 ventilation towers, one at each end. We're in Manhattan. We asked them if we can have permission to site our charging system on the yard. They agreed to it. It's been a very, very complicated process because halfway through the process, I find out that the building is a registered historic landmark. So the industrial designer now had to refocus the design in order to make it acceptable to the State Historical Preservation Society. It's fun, right? It's a lot of fun. So we're doing all the stuff where we're looking at various type of design and safety requirements, and we want to make sure that all of the equipment that these bus builders are going to install in these enclosures close to the public meets certain safety requirements. So we're worried about electromagnetic interference, electromagnetic coupling, impact on people with medical devices, the various types of, the dozens of international as well as US and Canadian standards. We want to make sure that most of them are met so that if we deploy this on a wide scale, that we deploy something that's safe. So a couple of the highlights. We got board approval for Terra and New Flyer. They're a couple of months apart. We started at exactly the same point in time, but this is representative of the experience of each bus builder with projects of this size. So I expect the New Flyer to be a little bit slower, and they've proven that they can live up to my expectations. Public design approvals, we've got for those. Construction drawings, that's what the CDs are. They're important because as you communicate with various permitting agencies, that's what they're going to ask for. They're going to say, let me see your CD 100s, let me see your CD 90s or CD 60s, whatever requirements they have, before I can sign off on your construction permits or land use permits or whatever applies in that case. We've actually awarded both contracts, the New Flyer most recently last week and Proterra months before that. We're in the process of re-engaging with all of our internal and external stakeholders to make sure we're still on track and we can meet all the commitments we made to them when we started the program. We're almost done with the permitting process. We're doing construction, at 5 different locations, 2 depots and 3 on-street locations, and we have five individual unique permitting processes and requirements with different stakeholders. That being said, buses are online, both at New Flyer and Proterra. They currently started the manufacturing process, and we expect to be in revenue service in December of this year. And then we're going to evaluate future deployments. Picture on the upper right-hand side is Worcester, Massachusetts. I was there about 1.5 years ago. This is a bus show in Europe. This is in Geneva. They're working with a slightly different charging system, Arctic buses. By next year, they should have this route fully articulated. It's a route that goes from the airport into the center of Geneva. And that's another demo that shows the potential of electric buses as long as you don't use a combustion heater. We've actually had some dialogue. I met with a developer about 2 months ago. We're asking a developer to consider foregoing the New York City required 25% parking spots for a number of apartments and to trade that off for a transit plaza in the lobby of the building. I don't believe the developer is going to buy that. But I think that as we deploy more electric buses in some parts of the city, that will be a really good match. Because if you can work with a developer where they can design an indoor bus stop or indoor bus layover area with zero-emission buses, that could really be a good positive benefit to the residents of that building. So that's it. Hopefully you have a lot of questions, and hopefully I can have a couple of answers for you.